So there are 3 trimesters of pregnancy, about 3 months each, making a 9-month pregnancy. That embryo that's inside the blastocyst will start to differentiate, which means that it just starts to change. And those cells, rather than being those stem cells that can become anything, they're deciding what they can become. So we call that embryo now a gastrula. So it's an embryo that has these germ layers that we're going to talk about, the ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. The process that the embryo goes through to form the gastrula is called gastrulation. It's a specific type of differentiation. So that's just the changing of cells over time. So if we think even about a regular cell in the body, when it differentiates to become a nerve cell, it grows axon, dendrites, and so on. So it's changing. And so these embryonic cells are changing. And in particular, they're changing into a gastrula as to become a fetus and a baby. So during gastrulation, the other structure that forms is an amniotic cavity, or the amnion. The amniotic cavity and the fluid is sort of like the water balloon that the embryo is going to grow inside of, protecting the embryo from infection, dehydration, impact, changes in temperature. By about the 4th week of pregnancy, a yolk sac develops that will provide proteins and some foundation for blood cells for the embryo's early weeks of life before its circulatory system forms. And then the 3 germ layers that are arising in the embryo itself are the ectoderm, endoderm, and the mesoderm. The ectoderm gives rise to the epidermis, which is also the skin. So skin cells come from that layer, and the nervous system. The endoderm gives rise to the endocrine glands, as well as the lining of the digestive and respiratory systems. And it's important that you memorize these. You can see the cross section of an embryo in this image below, and you don't need to know some of the other structures here, but we've got the ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm, right? The endoderm is this sort of middle layer in here, right? That's going to form the tubes, right? The glands, the ducts, the lining of the digestive system, respiratory structures. The mesoderm is sort of the middle layer. That's like our bones and our muscles and those structures. And then you've got the ectoderm as this outer layer of the skin and the nervous system. So it's actually sort of working its way out from the inside out. Another structure called the allantois membrane provides, or allantois sometimes, but blood vessels for the placenta, and it'll form eventually as we get more growth happening with this embryo, it'll form the umbilical cord. So if we have a look here, here's 2 images of a growing embryo, one at 14 days after fertilization, one at 25 days. And even in just that amount of time, you can see there's pretty significant difference between what's happening with these cells. So a lot of growth is happening during this time. Around week 5, diffusion is becoming inadequate to support what's growing in the embryo here. So the formation of the placenta will start, and it's going to be ready around 3 months, as well as the extra embryonic membranes are what we're going to see in this diagram here. So if we look, let's just start with the embryo. The embryo is here. The embryonic disc is what it's described as. There's the 3 layers. So it's just that little section right in here that's starting to grow. The yolk sac is here, and it looks big compared to the embryo, but it'll look smaller and smaller as we go. The amnion and the amniotic fluid and so on are here on the side, the amniotic cavity and the amnion. The allantois membrane, or the body stalk, is right here. So maybe we can just write that in there, that this is Let me just get another color here for the chorion. So there's, oh, I didn't mean to do it in that one. There's the chorion, and then there's the chorionic villi. So let's turn that into a highlighter. There we go. So the chorion and chorionic villi, that is the structure that the villi are embedding into the endometrium. That's going to be the area where nutrients, waste, oxygen, and so on are going to be exchanged. Don't forget also that the chorion itself is going to secrete the hormone HCG, right? And that's going to help maintain the corpus luteum, keeping the endometrium intact by keeping the secretions of estrogen and progesterone up. And if we look at the 25-day mark, and I'll just use this similar colors here, your chorion is this area. Actually, I'm going to pull that back just a little bit because that's going to be the allantois. So there's the chorion and the chorionic villi. If I'm using the same colors. And if I want to do the allantois, I think I use sort of an orangey kind of color. It's not that significantly different. Let's just grab it on a little bit more on the orange side. That's this one here. You can see the amnion, the amniotic sac. And so now this embryo is looking a little bit more embryo-like. There's your yolk sac. Let's get the embryo colored in here. So just relating those two colors to one another. From the top to the bottom, you can see there's lots of changes taking place, even just over a 10-day period. So the heart sort of bulges out on that embryo because it's a cluster of now blood vessels that are starting to pulse. The tail is quite literally like where the tailbone would be, and so legs are going to start to grow out of that area. Arms will start to grow out. Obviously, they're somewhere around the heart, and so when you compare it, you can also see that the chorionic villi in this second image are, more broken into kind of root systems, right? It's really sort of embedding itself into that endometrium and using all of the nutrients, exchanging waste, and so on. So this diagram here is just showing you another view of what this looks like over time. So what you could do is you could take your highlighter and go through those same areas. Anything that you see in there that's not what we talked about is not something that you're expected to know for this course. So there's just a few images there. So the placenta is going to be the site of exchange of nutrients and waste between the mother and the baby. And it'll be fully developed by the end of the third month. And here are the things that the substances that get supplied to the fetus and the substances that come back from the fetus. So the mother's blood supply provides to the fetus oxygen, glucose, lipids, water, minerals, vitamins, antibodies, hormones. The placenta is the exchange site between. And then the fetus, because these are growing cells, they're undergoing cellular respiration. There's going to be hormones that are created. So carbon dioxide, urea as waste, water, hormones, and other wastes. That should say wastes, not waster. That are going to get pushed back into the placenta so that the mother's body can get rid of them. So the placenta, as it's maturing, it starts to secrete estrogen and progesterone, and those levels start to go up. So the corpus luteum doesn't need to produce as much anymore as this placenta becomes its own gland. So when the placenta is becoming its own gland and increasing these levels, the corpus luteum is like, I don't need to make as much. So the corpus luteum eventually, in around that third month, will start to disintegrate because it's not needed anymore as the placenta is taking over its role. At this trimester here, around week 9, we would call the embryo a fetus at this point, as it has the structures that are associated with the definition of a fetus. The second and third trimester are pretty simple in that we're really just fine tuning all of these structures, and growth is happening. So in the second trimester, the fetus grows from about 5 centimeters to 30 centimeters, could be about 1.5 to 2 pounds by the end of the second trimester. Most of its major organs have formed, but still there's going to be development needed. There's going to be some soft hair, eyelids, and eyelashes, some of those details. The third trimester is really full of a lot of growth. So, kind of fattening up, getting ready for birth, going from maybe that 2 pound mark to 7 pounds or more by the time birth occurs. Another hormone now starts to get released by the placenta called relaxin, and it is a hormone that relaxes the pelvic ligaments so that it can allow the hip to expand to prepare for a vaginal birth.